When people think of Japanese airlines, Solaseed Air may not come to mind. While it's not Japan's largest airline, it's carved out a unique spot as one of the main carriers connecting Kyushu. Known for its friendly service and local ties, Solaseed Air has quietly built up a solid reputation competing against the established carriers. While we know the airline for what it is today, it wasn't without its challenges. My name's Ethan, and in this video, we'll take a closer look at the history of Solaseed Air and the obstacles it overcame to stay competitive in a newly deregulated Japanese market. Like all of our previous videos before, excluding the Mexai Air one, our story starts with deregulation. Japan's airline industry was heavily regulated by the Japanese government in the form of set fares and select route licensing. Towards the end of the 20th century, these regulations would gradually be lifted, with complete deregulation being achieved in 1997. As a result, a multitude of startups, including the aforementioned Skynet Airlines, Airdo, and Ibex would be founded, as well as today's topic, Solaseed Air. Solaseed Air would be founded on July 3rd, 1997, as Pan Asia Airlines. There's no information available for this period of the airline's history, so I can't say for certain which company or individuals founded Solaseed Air. However, a man by the name of Hattori Hiroyuki, probably butchered that, who previously served in the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, would be the first president of the airline. Sometime between the airline's founding dates and January 2000, the airline's name would officially change to Skynet Asia, with their website opening sometime after. In their first press release, President Hiroyuki would announce their plans, and to be honest, these plans were over-optimistic. The airline was to be a low-cost carrier based at Fukuoka, with a secondary hub at Miyazaki, with the routes operated being Fukuoka to Miyazaki and Okinawa. However, these plans would be changed in favor of routing from Miyazaki to Haneda and Fukuoka to Seoul and Shanghai. The airline began lobbying local governments, as well as hosting meetings with potential stockholders in order to raise much-needed funds. Operations were scheduled to begin in July 2001, with 6 round trips between Fukuoka and Miyazaki, with the Haneda and Miyazaki route commencing in March 2002. As the year 2000 continued, Skynet Asia would fail to meet its funding goals, despite securing funding from major companies, such as Nico Nico and Kirishima Shuzo. Fukuoka would also see an increase in competition, which would result in Skynet Asia focusing on Miyazaki to Haneda, using at least 737-400, with the hope being that the airline could remain on time for its planned launch date. Future plans would also be further expanded to include routes from Singapore and Hong Kong to Fukuoka, which would put them in direct competition with Singapore Airlines and Harlequin Air, which were already established carriers on those routes. Maintenance contracts with a Chinese-based company, along with General Electric's Malaysia branch, would be secured, with the plan being that the 737 would take a period of absence once a year for heavy maintenance. To coincide with the maintenance agreements, Asiana would sign an agreement with Skynet Asia to conduct trainings on their behalf. On July 19th, 2001, Skynet Asia would secure an agreement with European Capital Corporation to lease 2 737-400s, with delivery scheduled for the beginning of 2002. Skynet Asia would secure their operator's certificate on May 21st, 2002, with their 737s being delivered shortly thereafter. Both aircraft would be 4 years old at the time, and spent time with numerous airlines before being picked up by Skynet Asia. They'd pick up the registration Juliet Alpha 737 Alpha and Juliet Alpha 737 Bravo respectively. Operations would begin on August 1st with the Haneda to Miyazaki route, which would initially see 5 round trips per day, with the frequency of round trips being increased to 6 in September. Load factors would start out strong, passing their 20,000 passenger milestone within 3 weeks of commencing operations. Skynet Asia would enter 2003, securing leasing for 2 additional 737-400s, with the 737s being delivered in July. A new route between Kumamoto and Haneda would be added once the 737s were delivered, with 5 round trips per day. Another 737-400 would be brought in during 2004, with additional 737s brought in during 2005 and 2006. 2005 would also be a busy year for the airline, with both a positive part and a negative part. The positive part being a new route to Nagasaki from Haneda, with the negative part being that they'd have an incident, which would be classified as serious, with Juliet Alpha 737 Delta, one of their 737-400s, experiencing a depressurization event at 33,000 feet, while the route from Haneda to Miyazaki. The flight would safely land in Miyazaki, and during the subsequent investigation, it was revealed that the cabin pressurization outflow valve was excessively opening during flight. Normally, the cabin pressurization and outflow valve controls the rate in which air exits the cabin. With it opening excessively, It resulted in pressure falling below normal levels. While an exact cause was determined, the pressurization system had contamination in the system itself around the electrical wiring, which could have potentially caused a malfunction in the system. While the investigation itself would roughly take a year, 6 months after the Skynet Asia incident, Helios 522 would crash under similar circumstances, with the outflow valve being open during flight, and resulting in the cabin losing pressure and the crew basically just suffocating and passing out, which would result in the flight ultimately crashing after they ran out of fuel. Once the cause of the Skynet Asia incident was determined, Skynet Asia would ground all of their flights and do inspections on all the aircraft in their fleet. Skynet Asia would also improve their training and maintenance procedures, which was a key point laid out in the Japan Transport Safety Board's final report into the incident. 2006 would see Skynet Asia entering a code-sharing agreement with ANA on all flights, which would also allow for Skynet Asia to begin operating from ANA's recently finished Terminal 2 Haneda, as well as ANA being outsourced for ticket sales and reservations. Code-sharing with Airdy would also be secured shortly thereafter, beginning their history of future cooperation. This will be important down the line. One 737 would be withdrawn during 2007, with the aircraft being returned to its leaser. Due to ANA and JEL revitalizing the rewards program, as well as lowering prices on flights, Skynet Asia's load factor would drop significantly, with flights operating around a 57% capacity. With Skynet Asia being a low-cost carrier, profit margins were thin. The low-cost carrier strategy is a difficult one to begin with, relying on high load factors in order to be profitable. Because of this, the airline entered a precarious state, as well as attempting to find new profitable routes, which would lead them to entering the competitive Kagoshima to Haneda market in the summer 2007 season. The 2008 financial crisis would also start the next year, with Skynet Asia managing to ride out the crisis, minorly affected, with the only move being the withdrawal of a single 737. Before the financial crisis started, Skynet Asia would secure leasing for 3 additional 737-400s, with 2 of them coming from ANA and 1 coming from an unknown leaser. These 737s would be used on Skynet Asia's upcoming routes connecting Okinawa to Kagoshima and Nagasaki. With the global economy seeming to recover towards the end of 2009, routes from Okinawa would also be further expanded, with additional routes to Miyazaki and Kumamoto beginning in November, with code sharing also being further expanded to include Oriental Airbridge during this time. In 2010, Skynet Asia would secure an order for 2 brand new 737-800 leased from Ansett Worldwide Aviation Services, with delivery scheduled for the summer of 2011. This would be the start of their fleet renewal program, with their 737-400 scheduled to be phased out in the near future. The rest of 2010 would be quiet, with Oita to Haneda being added to the route network, closing out the year. On May 12, 2011, Skynet Asia would officially rebrand to Solaseed Air. This would include a new logo and a new livery on their brand new 737-800s, which would be delivered in June wearing the livery. Their 737-400s that would remain in the fleet would pick up the new livery in the near future as well. 2012 would be a relatively busy year for the airline, seeing the beginning of their fleet renewal program, with 3 737-400s being withdrawn and 4 737-800s being leased from General Electric Capital Aviation Services. Solaseed Air would also begin domestic charter operations with flights to Sendai and Sapporo New Chitose, and finally, routing to Kobe from Okinawa would be announced in December, with flights commencing in June 2013. Orders for even more 737-800s would be conducted during 2013 and 2014, as the 737-400s continued to be withdrawn. By the start of 2015, there would be 3 remaining 737-400s in the fleet. Routes to Okinawa would also be further expanded with flights to Ishigaki and Sentra beginning in 2015 as well. Solaseed Air would also begin international charter flights during the busy 2015 summer season, with flights to Kaohsiung. And after the summer season concluded, the final 737-400 would be withdrawn. This would leave the airline only operating 737-800s. An additional 737-800 would be leased out during the end of 2015, which would bring the airline up to 12 aircraft in its fleet. In 2016, Kumamoto Prefecture would suffer a series of earthquakes varying in intensity from magnitude 5.5 to 7.3 between the 14th and 16th of April. As a result, significant infrastructure damage would be dealt. Kumamoto Airport would be closed due to damage suffered during the earthquakes, with flights resuming with limited operations after repairs were done. with flights fully resuming operations on June 2nd. During the recovery effort, Solaseed Air would initially pledge to donate 1 million yen, with further donations along with agreeing to free transportation of supplies and personnel related to the relief effort. Fast forward to June 2018, Solaseed Air would begin international charter flights, with flights to Taipei, Taiwan from Nagasaki. Routes to Taipei, Taiwan would also be further expanded to include Oita, Kumamoto, Kagoshima, Naha, and Fukuoka. This would be a test in their expansion plan ruled for the 2017 to 2020 time period, in which they would intend to fully begin scheduled international routes. While international scheduled flights wouldn't come to fruition, it would still be an important stepping stone for the future, with charter operations to Taipei from Oita, Kagoshima, and Kumamoto occasionally coming back. Flights to Kagoshima from Central would be added for the 2018 summer season, with another 737-800 being leased out, which would further serve to bolster the fleet, along with an additional 737 brought in during the 2019 summer season leased from ANA, which would be the final aircraft to join the Solaseed Air fleet to date. At the start of 2020, Miyazaki to Centure, along with Fukuoka to Naha, would be added to the route network. As we're all familiar with, the pandemic would put a dent in the plans of Solaseed Air. As we've discussed previously, low-cost carriers are vulnerable to change in their market due to profit margins being thin. Because low-cost carriers use their high load factors to make a profit, the pandemic closures would hit Solaseed Air especially hard. While they would be one of the first airlines to reduce services due to COVID, one of their strategies in order to maintain passenger numbers on routing they kept was to reduce prices. They would also move to operating air freight as well. However, their overall operating income would drop by over 60%. In May 2021, Solaseed Air would make a move to establish a joint holding company along with Airdo, which was also struggling during the pandemic. As discussed previously in the Airdo video, a merger for both airlines was feasible, with both airlines being low-cost carriers, having code-sharing and other cooperation agreements with ANA, as well as having a hub at Haneda Airport, with the route networks complementing each other. While on paper the airlines would merge and form a joint holding company under the name of Regional Plus Wings Corporation, stock from each company would be transferred to the company. The airlines would continue to operate as separate entities, and in their first full year of operation, their operational income would recover by 30%. While they were still operating at an overall loss, this was still while the pandemic restrictions were still in place, which wouldn't fully lift until the end of April 2023. On February 20th, 2023, Solaseed Air would partner with Miyazaki Prefecture, along with the Pokemon Company, for a special livery on one of their 737-800s. Juliet Alpha 803 X-Ray would be the aircraft chosen, with Miyazaki Prefecture's mascot, Executor, adorning the aircraft. The aircraft would enter service 2 weeks later on March 2nd, with the aircraft primarily serving the Kumamoto Miyazaki routing to Haneda. With COVID restrictions lifting in Japan during 2023, in their first full year of operations during the fiscal year of 2024, the joint airline would record a profit of 2.72 billion yen. While this is down compared to pre-pandemic levels, it's still progress nonetheless, considering passenger numbers still haven't recovered to pre-pandemic levels. While this wraps up the operational history of Solaseed Air, I'd like to try a new section, attributing to why Solaseed Air was so successful. So, if you could let me know if you enjoyed this upcoming section or not, I'd appreciate it. As mentioned before with the low-cost carrier strategy, high load factors are crucial in order to make a profit. With Japan's skies becoming deregulated at the end of the 1990s, this opened up the door for low-cost carriers, which were already beginning to emerge in Europe and North America, which had undergone their own deregulations earlier than Japan. Obviously, the advantage with the low-cost carrier is that you only pay for what you need for. Like, there's no sense in paying for a full premium ticket if all you're bringing is a carry-on. And like I said, with the last of the regulations being regarding fares, this would open up the door for low-cost carriers, which there'd be plenty of startups, as we've discussed. And with Solaseed Air being the last of the 90 startups, they were able to learn from the other airlines' mistakes, such as in the case of Airdo, which saw fierce competition on their Seoul route, the Haneda to Nuchitose route, which would overall lead them to eventually pivot from the low-cost carrier service method. Solaseed Air would choose their routes carefully, choosing routes with little competition on them in order to create their own niche in the market, whilst competing with the established carriers in ANA and JEL. With low-cost carriers, rapid expansion is usually conducted in the first few years of operation, simply out of necessity. Granted, the airline has enough capital in order to do so. Because of Solaseed Air's adept president, they were able to raise the necessary startup capital in order to facilitate expansion. With low-cost carriers, you'll see them trying out untapped routes in order to potentially find a gold mine, even if it doesn't make any sense. While it can potentially work, more often than not, the routes would be discontinued rapidly, since as mentioned, high load factors are needed in order to bring in a profit. Obviously, unprofitable routes are problematic, which is multiplied in low-cost carriers, which is why you'll basically see them axing unprofitable startup routes instantly, once they realize it isn't going to work. Shit, we had 4 airlines at my local airport, which they were supposed to operate for a summer season to test the market, and discontinued it after 2 weeks due to poor performance. In Solaseed Air's case, they also never once discontinued route, only temporarily stopping service on certain routes as a result of COVID. With choosing routes that worked, they didn't suffer losses, which are seen with starting up a route and rapidly discontinuing services on it. Solaseed Air also stuck with the low-cost carrier operating system, primarily operating a single aircraft type, with a fleet renewal project once the older aircraft began to become more expensive and approach their D-checks, as well as once more efficient aircraft and cheaper aircraft hit the market. They also balanced the delivery of new aircraft with phasing out of old aircraft, which also helped. As we know, operating a single aircraft type makes things significantly less expensive compared to operating multiple aircraft types, with crew training and maintenance being comparatively less expensive. Finally, the last point was expanding at a reasonable pace. You can't expand too fast or too slow. You need to be right in the middle. On the one hand, you have the case of Airdo. They initially expanded too slow, which resulted in competition increasing on their sole route, which forced them to pivot eventually from the low-cost carrier operating system and contributed to them going bankrupt for a short time. On the other end, you have the early 2010s Skymark, which expanded too fast with their infamous ordering of the A380s and A330s to pivot from a low-cost carrier service to a premium service style, which would also result in them entering bankruptcy. Another point I forgot to mention was with the fundraising, that allowed them to avoid taking out costly loans, which added time to start up, but it still worked out for them. While they did initially plan to start international routes, they would choose a smart decision and do some chartered flights to test the market, and eventually scrap their decision once they realized it wasn't feasible. While I get it was initially planned out in their launch decision, PR release, whatever you call it, the market still wasn't feasible, so they ended up choosing the right decision twice. Even still to this day, independent medium to long-haul LCCs aren't feasible in Japan. While Air Japan and Zip Air began operations in the 2020s, along with other airlines previously, these are subsidiaries of ANA and JEL, which allows them to take more risks, with the backing of a financially sound airline group behind them. AirAsia Japan would attempt to complement their domestic network with some international routes. However, coupled with the pandemic, they'd end up going bankrupt despite the backing of the AirAsia group behind them. But that's a story for another day. As of 2025, the only LCCs which operate international routes from Japan are Zip Air, Air Japan, Spring Airlines Japan, Jetstar Japan, Peach Aviation, and Starflyer maybe. I don't know if they're an LCC or not anymore. I haven't looked into it. But all these airlines, besides maybe Starflyer, I haven't looked into it as I said, are subsidiaries of other airlines. Even with the backing of other airlines, you have Vanilla, which went bankrupt, and AirAsia twice, I'm pretty sure. But anyways, thanks for watching. I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, all that shit. It means a lot to me. And if you didn't like the video, I'd appreciate it if you could give me feedback, rather than just disliking the video, since it doesn't give me any feedback at all. But anyways, I'll let you guys go. Peace.